Hi friends, this is Annie Grace, and I'm the author of This Naked Mind, and I'm answering questions today. Today's question is from Lulu. She says, I've read your book and follow your Facebook page every day. I find your approach very refreshing and exciting. Thank you. And as you say in your book, the willpower method eventually dries up. What I'd like to ask you is, why do we tend to forget all the bad things about drinking after a while of abstinence and then start fondly remembering all the good times? I know intellectually how awful alcohol was to me, but that disgust that I had for alcohol in my early days of sobriety isn't so strong anymore, and I find myself reminiscing about drinking periods in my life. At the time, those periods weren't actually fun at all, but I seem to remember a much nicer, rosier version. How do I remind myself and regain the determination I had in the early days? I know this is the right decision, but sometimes my emotions are not in line with my logic. Thank you so much, Lulu. Yeah, yes, Maggie. I think that it's really true. We tend to remember things in completely different terms than they actually were, and I think it's a protection mechanism in some ways. I mean, for example, I don't know if Lulu, if you have kids, but I was really nauseous during both my pregnancies and of course childbirth. We go through that and you swear, oh gosh, this is not worth it. This is horrible. And then, things happen and you don't even remember that. I mean, it's similar to being hung over in the moment. How would you ever do this to yourself? And it feels so incredibly miserable. But after the physical feeling is gone, you can't remember a physical feeling. So you can't remember how those things were. So we tend to do things to ourselves again and again because we can't actually remember the physicality of some of these things. And I think that's really true with alcohol. And I think, another thing is that a lot of probably what you're missing and mourning is just a lot of good times in your life. And it's hard sometimes to separate what was just really good times that you really enjoyed with what was really the drinking and what drinking did for you. So I think that at times, you look back and you remember something and it's easy to think, well, that was the alcohol. But in fact, that was actually just a period of your life that was not now that you're missing, just like any other period of your life. So I think it's okay. And I guess the first thing I'd say is it's totally okay to remember things fondly that happened in your life. I think where the trick is to just remember that, and be really logical and conscious about the fact, as you say you are, that it wasn't actually the alcohol that was making those things fun. And I think we can get pretty tricked and deceived, especially because we're susceptible to so much unconscious conditioning around drinking. So I know I've talked about this before, and I can't really, say, yes, go do this, but I will tell you what I did when this happened to me, because it happened to me about 4 months in, and all of the reasons that I had stopped drinking definitely faded. Like I was feeling better, I had lost weight, I was really had tons of energy, my anxiety had gone away, I was feeling really good and on top of the world. And so it was hard to remember why I quit in the first place. And it seemed like such a sort of innocent thing and everybody else was doing it. I didn't really understand. So what I did is 4 months in, I did this self-experiment. And I just had to know for myself. I had to know if there was anything I was missing out on. And so apologies if you've heard this before, but I basically locked myself in a room with a video camera and just got drunk over a period of 4 or 5 hours and was by myself because I didn't want to obviously if I was at a concert or with a bunch of friends, that would have been fun. So I wanted to separate what was the alcohol from what was the fun and just saw, okay, how does this make me feel? Is this adding anything to my night? Is this making things fun? And it didn't. I mean, the room got fuzzier. It got the edges started fading in. I got really tired. I didn't really have a good time and I videotaped myself through it. And so I watched the videos. And I'll post them sometime. I keep saying I'm going to do that, and I really will. I just need to dig them out, and it's a lot of videos, so I need to probably edit it down. But horrible to watch the videos. Horrible to see the drunk around your eyes and see how you're this fun, engaging person, and then you just turn into someone else. And seeing that on camera was really eye-opening because then every time I wanted to, every time drinking started to sound like a good idea, I could just remember that there wasn't really anything in it for me anymore. So, I think that that's what I did for myself, but it's hard when we're around all our friends and they're all doing something because it seems to us, okay, well, why would that be so bad. The truth is that what you see with your friends is not the misery. I mean, I knew I kept my misery around drinking really locked up, you know. I definitely beat myself up in the middle of the night, you know, after I'd wake up from all the carbs rushing through my system. And, you know, if your friends are struggling with their drinking or having cognitive dissonance around it or feeling badly the next day, which, let's be honest, you know, just a few beers can make you feel suboptimal the next day, you don't see that part of it. And so it's really easy to say, oh, well, it just looks so harmless, you know. So the other thing I discuss, you know, about this is just the specific influences on your unconscious. And the thing that's most important, I think, to be aware of, and especially this is coming from, you know, my advertising background and how advertisements influence people, because nobody believes that they're influenced by advertising. I mean, we just sort of say, oh yeah, that doesn't affect me, yet advertisers continue to spend lots and lots and lots of money on advertisements. So something is working, even though we don't feel like it is. And the trick about it is that they're actually more powerful when you're not aware of them. When you bring them into your awareness, and when you look at an advertisement or you look at a situation critically, you have the ability then to determine what you're going to take from that situation consciously. So if you just go to a big social event and you just kind of zone out on the drinking and you're not really aware of it, you're getting all these impressions and all these things are coming in, and you're not really aware that they're coming in. Whereas if you go to a social event and everybody's drinking and you take this time to really say, okay, like, let me evaluate this, let me look at what I'm going to take from this. I think that that's really where the unconscious can actually, you can decide what you'll take from it. So let's look at it another way. Like, remember a time when you were really, say you were really deep in thought, reading a book or engaged in your Facebook feed, and either your kid or your husband, they said, hey, I was talking to you, aren't you listening to me? Usually you can sit there and say, stop what you're doing and rewind the last few seconds in your head and recall what they just said and say, oh yeah, I'm listening. You wanted me to start dinner. And the truth is you weren't listening, but your mind was listening. And so although you weren't consciously listening, we have this ability to kind of rewind what just happened, because our mind is taking in the information even when we're not aware of it. And I think that's kind of one of the more poignant examples I can give about how we're always unconsciously listening to everything that's going on. So the more aware you become of it, you know, the better it is, because then you can actually take what you want to take from it. You know, if you're at a party where everybody's drinking, having a good time, and you don't consciously think about your experience and how you don't actually need alcohol to have a good time, and then, you know, you might take away the impression that it's important for a drink in hand to have a good time. So I think really being consciously aware of it is important. And I think, you know, thinking logically about the fact that there's no way that human beings were created with this fun gap inside us that's the, you know, size and shape of a bottle of alcohol. Like, we were created to be able to enjoy pleasures, to be able to enjoy each other, to be able to enjoy socializing. You know, we weren't created to need alcohol. That's just completely illogical, and it doesn't make any sense. And so reminding yourself of that on a really regular basis is, I think, a good idea. So Lulu, I hope that helps. I actually have a live question from Stephen. He says, what about trauma? I only have 65 days sober and I'm facing some potentially heavy stuff. They think my wife might be very sick. Oh, yikes. They're going to open her up tomorrow and see what's going on. And they've warned us to be prepared for the C word. Has anybody else been through something similar? How did you get through it without self-medicating? Oh, wow. Stephen, first of all, I'm so sorry to hear that. That's really hard, and I'll be thinking about you. I think it is really easy to want to self-medicate during times like that. And I guess the best thing that I could say is that right now you have one potential tragedy, and it's going to be intense and it's going to be brutal. If you were to start drinking, and by definition, drinking does create separateness between people. So it will make you insulated, but you'll probably not be able to be there for your wife quite to the extent that you would be if you were sober. So even if you have more tears and more pain and more feeling sober, you will also be doing your wife a much bigger service by being there for her with more tears and more pain and more feeling than you would be if you were to self-medicate and insulate those feelings away and not be able to connect with her during this time when she needs you. And, you know, you have one potential tragedy here, which is heartbreaking. By bringing alcohol into it, you could have two potential tragedies. And, you know, not that alcohol is going to kill you tomorrow, but definitely over time, alcohol is really dangerous. And I think that the other really important thing to know here, and I'd love to hear from the community, you know, if you guys have any advice for Stephen, I think it's really valuable. But often, you know, I say in my book that any person, any human being in the right level of ingesting, in the right circumstance, in the right scenarios, can become addicted to alcohol. And I've gotten some pushback on that because people say, well, you know, I've seen people drink for years and years and never have a problem. And that's absolutely true. But in the research that I've done, especially since I published, and the new research that's coming to light specifically by a doctor called Dr. Kevin McCauley, when you drink to self-medicate and when you drink to relieve stress, your brain actually mistakes that for something you need to survive. So if you weren't deeply addicted to alcohol before, and then you use alcohol as a self-medication, your chances of literally rewiring your pleasure circuit in order for that alcohol to alleviate the intense stress that you're going to be under and the intense trauma and tragedy that's going to be happening, that is when very severe addiction occurs. And they've shown this in different studies. And there's a DVD called Pleasure Unwoven that I like to recommend. And also you can YouTube Dr. Kevin McCauley, and he does a lecture on this. But basically what happens is we have a hedonic sense similar to our sense of sight, our sense of taste. And that hedonic sense, you know, goes up and down, and normal pleasures can break through it when we're really stressed out. When something really intense happens, your entire hedonic sense elevates. So when you're dealing with something like this, it's very unlikely, you know, that you're going to be able to completely relax going out to dinner because this is going to be on your brain. So everything about your kind of level of stress inside your body and mind has elevated. And the thing about it is that alcohol and any other addictive drug, they can break through that hedonic floor artificially. And so because it artificially activates your pleasure circuit of your brain, alcohol can really break through that. And when that happens, your brain, because of its incredible ability to learn what is good for you, actually learns that alcohol is as important then to you as sort of food and water. And it learns that alcohol is completely key to your survival because it's breaking that. And so it's a very short-term thing that can have dire long-term consequences. And when you get addicted to that extent, where you actually rewire your brain, and yes, this often happens because you're drinking from stress or trauma or something that's happened in early childhood, that is when you hear about people who like literally couldn't have alcohol in the house or near them, or you know, have a really hard time going even days without kind of being in a rehab center because they need to be physically removed from the temptation to drink. And so that type of addiction, I mean, I'm thankful every day that I felt like I was on that road. I felt like I was on that road, that alcohol was far more important to me than it ever should have been. I also don't feel like I got that far and that deep into addiction where my brain had physically changed. And the scary thing about when your brain changes, and again, this is when you're using alcohol or any drug to self-medicate, is they've put addicts to that extent in MRI machines, and it damages your prefrontal cortex, which is your ability to make long-term decisions and forego short-term pleasure. And so if they put an alcoholic in an MRI machine and show them a trigger image, like a glass of scotch on the rocks, something like that, their prefrontal cortex literally goes black. So their ability in that situation to make a decision is literally turned off, which is why people cannot resist a craving. And the survival part of your brain, the part of your brain that's learned that alcohol is key for survival, lights up. And that's why, you know, in mice, they've seen the same thing, where mice will starve themselves to self-administer that drug, and they will forego taking care of their young. They will, go over really electric metal grating and endure really severe physical pain. And that's because, again, when you use it in times of stress to self-medicate, and when you break through that hedonic threshold, it becomes, your brain learns that it is vital to your survival. And so if there's anything that you can do to be there for your wife, to be present in this, no matter how it feels, you could be introducing a whole other set of problems by using alcohol to self-medicate, because I do think that the most dangerous time for any of us to be using an addictive substance for self-medication is during times of intense stress and tragedy and trauma. And hopefully you can find some other ways, because there are definitely healthy ways to kind of deal with it. And I know nothing is going to artificially stimulate it like alcohol, so nothing's going to probably turn off your brain quite as fast as getting drunk till you pass out, but that's not going to fix anything. And so anyway, it's a really good question. Thank you. It's my first kind of live question that I've had to answer, and I love to do that. So, and again, if anybody has any advice for Stephen about having, a significant amount of sobriety under their belt, and congratulations, Stephen, and then dealing with something really, really intense, it would be welcome in the comments. So anyway, thank you guys so much, and have a really good day. Again, this is Annie Grace, author of This Naked Mind.